we're changing our business model slowly to where we have fewer clients, but deeper relationships with them. We do tax, legal, and accounting. That's all under one roof. And so Arizona is the first one to formally and finally allow lawyers to partner with non-lawyers.
All right. Hey, welcome to episode 5 of the Advisors Collective podcast. Super excited about this episode. We're starting to get into the meat of really what Advisors Collective is all about. We've been having lots of conversations around tech, kind of CRMs for financial advisors, how they can use a lot of these different tools to increase their business. And that's a lot of the philosophy around the show, right? Is skill set, tool set, mindset. You work on those 3 things, you keep adding in those 3 different areas, and you will increase asset, right? You'll increase income, cash flow, and everything goes with it. So today I'm on with a new acquaintance, becoming a friend quickly, out of Arizona, Mike Payne. Super excited, Mike, to have you on. This guy's a JD, CPA, founder of Boss Advisors. So he's got all the distinctions that I don't have, which is super cool and impressive. So Mike, welcome to the show. Excited to have you on.
Appreciate it, Josh. This is awesome to be on the show.
Yeah, so we met, I think we met for the first time when I was in Phoenix, right? Didn't we do breakfast? Was that with Mike McDonald? And
That's right.
Was that the first time we talked?
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah. So yeah, we did a little breakfast brunch thing when I was there in the winter, which was very different than when I was there a couple of weeks ago in August. The temperature vibes are a little bit different.
Yeah, until that's what happens when you play 36 holes of golf back to back in the 110-degree heat. You kind of learned your lesson, I'm hoping.
Yeah, I learned my lesson. I was like, you know what, don't do that again. That was bad. I think I slept 2 nights in a row for 12 hours or something to recover. But yeah, I was just really impressed when we met, what you do, what your firm's all about, what you like, not only your philosophies, but the philosophies of your company and the team you've built. But first off, I just back up. I of course don't know Phoenix super well. We were in Tempe, but I think your office is in Mesa. Is that right?
Yeah, we're just east of Tempe. Tempe's home of Arizona State University. About 10 minutes from the airport. I'm 25 minutes from the airport in downtown Phoenix, and it's a growing suburb of Phoenix. And then I actually have the blessing of living in Gilbert, which is half a mile, basically across one road. I'm in Gilbert, and so I have an office half a mile from my house, which has been beautiful.
Yeah, I know Gilbert now, Chandler, and I know Mesa. So my buddy up here has a helicopter parts business. I think there must be an airport in Mesa because they do military aircraft repair and stuff like that for the U.S. military and others based out of there. So
yeah, your friends are cooler than my friends. I can tell you that right now.
Awesome. He's like, I haven't gotten to visit his shop yet, but he lives here in Indiana and shops down in Mesa. So anyways, yeah. So you born and raised in the suburbs of Philly, Phoenix, and just went to school in that area, college, high school, that kind of thing?
Yeah, born and raised. My dad's a farmer. He's 70 plus and still working. Mom's a nurse. I was 8 out of 9 kids, and we're all basically, most of us are still here, at least in Southwest. So I'm a local boy. I went to Arizona State. Well, I went to Northern Arizona University, NAU, for undergraduate, got my accounting degree, and then I went to law school at ASU. And then basically I've always lived in the East Valley, east of Phoenix, and I was at Big 4 accounting firms or law firms for the first 7 years of my career. And then I leapt out on my own, started my own firm. I started 2 firms actually at the end of 2017, a law firm and an accounting firm. And then I ran those side by side for 3 years until the state Supreme Court came out with a new rule regarding lawyers' professional responsibilities, which now allows lawyers to partner up with non-lawyers. And so essentially, I was able to bring my partner from my accounting firm into my law firm, and now our firm is kind of a hybrid. We do tax, legal, and accounting for businesses and nonprofits all under one roof.
I mean, that's where I live in Indiana. That is, nobody does that. Is that, you said something about the Supreme Court of Arizona? Is that a rule for everybody listening? We have listeners all over the country. So is that something really specific that happened in Arizona? Or there are a couple other states similar? What?
Yeah, the only
Super
so
special
it's
there.
unique to Arizona. Arizona is pretty business friendly with our tax rates and incentives and things like that. And so Arizona is very progressive to have done this. We actually, if you look outside the United States, there are, especially countries like Canada, UK, and Australia, which you would think those are most closely governed, uh, you know, to closest to the U.S. of anywhere in the world. Um, my understanding is that in each of those countries, lawyers uh, and accounting firms can essentially be joint. Accounting firms, the big four accounting firms outside of the U.S. Provide legal services. It's very
Oh,
common in most countries. In the U.S., law practice is governed by each individual state, and so Arizona is the first one to formally and finally, meaning permanently, allow lawyers to partner with non-lawyers. Utah has what's called a sandbox, so they're playing with it. They've got some regulations that allow something similar. My prediction, Josh, is that we're going to see this happening more and more. There's a lot of national attention. Our firm is the first one approved. I heard about this early, and I probably spent 40 hours on our application. I had to sit before the Supreme Court and kind of argue why you should qualify. And there's social benefits to this, and the one that we've been able to, that I predicted, I think has come true, is that our clients have access to lawyers in a way that no other firm can provide because say what you will about financial advisors, say what you will about lawyers, every industry has its own kind of reputational its reputation. There's a stigma against working with lawyers, right? Usually you only work with lawyers when, can I cuss on your podcast?
oh, for sure.
Oh yeah, when shit hits the fan, right? That's when you call a lawyer usually.
Yep.
Um, in the way we work with clients, we have subscription model, and we bring in lawyers before the clients even think they need one. And ours is all focused on the business transaction planning side, estate planning, business planning, business transactions, but we don't do any litigation, right? So a common occurrence would be we'd have a client that we're doing some tax planning for, and we see something weird in their entity structure. And so we'd bring one of our business lawyers in to look at it and make some suggestions as to how to restructure things to provide them better liability protection, tax efficiency, or maybe to, maybe we'd come in and relook at their contracts. Maybe they don't have a basic operating agreement in place, employment agreements, things like that.
Yeah. I mean, it's kind of like our healthcare system, legal, and CPA too. My friend's CPA, and he always said, Josh, I'm a historian. I can only do basically what's already been done. I can only change that. He said, but you can actually manipulate change up front as an advisor. It's like you get somebody to, let's say, put money into a tax deferred account, let's say, or do something that will affect, he's like, how I report their taxes. He's like, but legal is the same thing. If people are only going to lawyer after something's broken, it's just like Americans. We're like, we don't pay attention to our health proactively very much. We just wait till something's going wrong, and then we go ask the doctor for a shot or a pill or something that could fix it. And when it comes to like estate planning, that can be an extremely expensive play, right? So you're working not only in the tax but in the legal. What are some of the things uh, that it's just too expensive to not do it preemptively? You need to plan this stuff ahead of time, and particularly maybe for what type of people, as a business owners, who really needs to get ahead of some of these challenges.
Yeah. So you got to look at the cost benefit every time you're trying to make any decision in life. When it comes to the work we do, the no brainers, things your listeners already know, we already know. Forming an LLC, and then honoring, the corporate formalities is a no-brainer. It's almost zero cost, right? Because considering the risk that you're taking on when you start a business and the risk to your personal finances, the cost of forming an LLC is minuscule compared to the potential risk you have by not forming an LLC. Um,
Yeah. So what's the case? I mean, so there's LLC formations, there's operating agreement formations. Let's say that's a
yep.
part of that, right? So if you have two business partners, how important is it upfront to make sure that OA is really written properly, just for all the clear guidelines? Let's say it's an LLC, to just protect one of another. Like, is that the sort of stuff you guys do, help people through, or is it just purely formation?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So I would say it's critical if you want to govern how your partnership operates. If you don't have an operating agreement, every state has its own LLC rules that will kick in. And so you'll if the again the shit hits the fan in your partnership, and you don't have a formal operating agreement signed by both partners, you're going to go to the default statutes and the case law of your state. And so then at that point, working through a dispute, you've got to hire a lawyer because nobody can really navigate the case law without hiring a lawyer, and so now it becomes costly and uncertain. And in the meantime, you're trying to continue to run your business, and you're dealing with this big shit show. Whereas if you had just done an operating agreement, even a templated one that you find online is better than nothing. Well, let me say, sometimes it's better than nothing. Um, I can say the LegalZoom one is definitely better than nothing. But if you've got any sort of complications in your partnership, where you've got employees, multi-state operations, multiple service lines, um, anything that would add any sort of risk or complication, you really need to have that operating agreement in place, and you need to update it from time to time too. Don't just set it and forget it.
Yeah. So, I mean, a lot of our audience are financial advisors. So, a financial advisor is meeting with a business owner. Is it overstepping their grounds, or do you think it's really important that the advisor like walk into that conversation with that business owner? Like, how are you structured? Do you have an operating agreement? Like, how are you and your partner set up essentially? Is that important, or is everybody in the country set up right? Or do you think the advisors should be having those conversations and getting that fixed?
Yeah, they should do the same thing I do with regard to financial advising, which is I'm issue spotting, and I need to know enough to know if, like, when to recommend that they go to a financial advisor. And so, on the same, token, an advisor, absolutely, on the intake form, I would absolutely have questions about the structure and contracts and things like that. But again, you can't provide legal advice. There's an unauthorized practice of law statutes in every state. So you can't go tell them, oh, you guys are set up as a corp, you should become an LLC, or you guys are an LLC, you should make an S corp election. That's tax advice slash legal advice. Don't do that, but do know enough to where you can issue spot and say, hey, I've learned enough here where I highly recommend you go work with a lawyer or a tax professional. Here's what I predict they're going to say, but you're going to have to talk with them about it. And then that's a great opportunity for networking, because now you can bring in a warm lead. If you've done the work to kind of establish a relationship with advisors in ancillary fields, accounting, legal, banking, lending, insurance. You got those relationships in place. Now you can bring in a warm lead for them, which makes you look good to the client and to your referral source.
Yeah, I mean, you're not trying for sure. I mean, you want to keep away from the lines of legality as an advisor, not walking into a place, especially in tax. I mean, I think a lot of advisors start to talk beyond their scope,
Yeah.
in that realm, when they should just be deferring to a really trusted advisor in that side of things. Same thing on legal, which means, of course, creating relationship with somebody. I think an integrated relationship with somebody like your team. I mean, everybody's got them all over the country. There's some guys who work with some shops that can work with people around the nation. Some people you might the financial advisor might run a very brick and mortar. All their clients come to their office. They should probably find a CPA tax person that's really, in their backyard for their kind of clients. But are you guys more digital? Do you guys I mean, we're of course very digital right now. but I'm in just outside Chicago, Northwest Indiana. You're in Mesa, so Arizona. What what's you guys' process? What does that look like from the digital front? And then the secondary part of that is the industry of CPA and tax, well, those are normally two separate worlds, except for in Arizona. Um, is it moving that way, or more people meeting digitally and not just purely brick and mortar? Like, where do you see that going in the next 5, 10 years?
Yeah, I would actually challenge a point. I don't think you need to look locally when you're trying to build your referral network. I would more try to figure out who aligns with your approach. And so finding an accountant and a lawyer who, well, it's dual purpose. One, they're going to back you up on whatever you advise clients, right? We always see the friction between the different professions. I can't tell you how many times I've heard, well, my lawyer won't give me an opinion on this because he can't provide tax advice. My accountant won't give me an opinion on this because he can't provide legal advice. So the client now has to kind of manage these differing opinions from his different advisors, and that's a challenge to the client. Whereas if we do this properly, my professions, your profession, we can we can really create something beautiful for the client where they've got a collaborative team working behind the scenes that are figuring out, okay, from a tax, legal, financial perspective, what's best for the client. Let's all put our heads together. Maybe we can't charge the client for that meeting, but I think we can. And if you do it right, you can still have those meetings and not it be a waste of your time. Um, but I would, I think figure out, and we are all moving to online. We're all moving to digital. The world is becoming smaller. Figure out who best aligns with your approach, and then figure out how you guys can work off each other and build your businesses together. And usually it's probably not going to be the guy behind, down the street from you. I think you're really limiting your mindset if you live in a small town and you think the only people you can send your clients to is the other advisors in your small town. I think you're really going to limit, your referral opportunities as well as the advice that your clients will get.
Yeah, I'm glad you said that because I actually think that the same way. But I frame that in the thinking of the average financial advisor, which
Sure.
is just kind of old school, and they don't really think, what if the smartest guy for me to work with or the best team to work with is in another state? Well, yeah, that can work nowadays. We have
Yeah.
computers, and like it's kind of interesting how the technology has helped. And if you're willing to accept that, then your clients usually will too. I mean, I just saw such a massive shift in our industry in COVID in
Sure.
particular because I'm 39. So, 4 years ago, I'm in my mid 30s. I'm trying to get clients to meet online versus, an hour drive, let's say, to my office. And I'm like, hey, we're just doing your review. Just pop online and do a Zoom, for instance. And they would just push back on it really hard, or no, just no, we'll drive up, you come down. It was always some situation where somebody was still moving in
Yeah.
order, driving, whatever, to make it happen. And then what happens? COVID. And then suddenly grandparents weren't going to see their grandkids if they didn't figure out how to turn on that laptop. Not in every state was like that, but a lot of states it was like that. So there was this lockdown period, and then people just like, okay, I'm going to figure out how to get on Zoom. And then quickly during that time, right in the middle of COVID, they're like, oh, I want to see what's going on with my investments. Because if you remember, it was the biggest down and up swing in the history of the market ever. So they wanted to talk to their financial advisors and they had to do it digitally. And just like that, we watched a whole industry shift
Yeah.
from purely in office to a hybrid, at least today. I think a bunch of it's back off because a lot of people liked in person, but it's at least got a healthier blend now. So would you say your team operates that way? Certain clients come in, certain people are online, or most online? What does that look like?
Yeah, we actually went from we owned a building. My business partner and I owned a building. Um, we were doing well pre-COVID. Then during COVID, we found a deal in a building, bought 2 units. We built it out and had this beautiful storefront. We had frontage on a very busy road. with a big sign, and we worked in office, and it was collaborative, and we used our conference room and our 85-inch TV for presentations, and we
Yep.
had a soda machine in our kitchen. It was just this big lavish thing, um, and then my business partner left, wanted to start his own small firm doing something a little bit different, and so we parted ways a couple years ago. And I just got to thinking, like, do I really need this big lavish office? What is it actually adding? At that point, some of my team was remote. I had hired a guy local who then moved to Idaho, and then I kind of just went through this awakening. Like, I'm spending, between utilities and supplies and the mortgage, $9,000 a month on this building.
Yep.
And um, most of my team, I met with everybody, and they're like, yeah, we're good. If you can help us figure out a good setup at home, we want to work remotely. And so we moved to a remote firm. Um, I would say we're more hybrid, because I did find a buddy with an office in the same complex, just a one individual office that I'm sitting in, who had some space. And so I pay minimal rent here, because I'm a little bit old school. I want to have a place for our clients to meet if we need them to. So I have access to a conference room. But now I'm paying a few $100 a month instead of several thousand. And I have my own space. Again, I'm only half a mile from my house. It's actually nice to separate work from home.
Yep.
Um, and I have a place for my clients to meet if we need to. I would say we use the conference room like every other week. Honestly, we went to using it to 5 meetings a day, to like once or twice a month. We'll use the conference room. Um, and that we don't get a lot of pushback when our entire process, from the initial discovery meeting through delivery of services through regular check-ins, is all done via, we do Teams video. We don't get pushback from anybody. The one exception is, if we're bringing a big client in, I do want to meet them in person just to establish that trust and have the traditional handshake. But we may go to their place of business. They may come to ours. But again, it's not necessary. It's just kind of a nice to do.
Yeah.
There's a lot of clients I still haven't met in person, and we have great relationships.
It's amazing. I mean, would you say that your industry as a whole has switched to that, or would you say that's just because you guys are unique, you were forward looking?
Smaller firms are definitely moving that way. The more, I look at, just like with your industry, there's old school firms, and then there's kind of this new age, firm of the future type model. I was lucky enough to start my business when, you know, firms were using uh, cloud-based technology. So QuickBooks Online was up and coming when I started my firm. So I didn't take any QuickBooks Desktop clients. Um, I didn't. I kind of figured out what I wanted my tech stack to look like, and I decided everything's got to be cloud-based and it has to integrate natively with each other. So I don't use anything that requires a server. It's just a whole piece of the puzzle that I don't have to deal with. Um, and so I pay Google and Microsoft to store my data on some big server in the middle of the desert, and I don't have to deal with that.
Dude, it's gigantic. I think you and I haven't even had this conversation, so this is fun because it's organic. That's how why we started Terra Wealth between me and my partners, because it was kind of the same thing. We saw the industry changing kind of where we were at, but same thing. We pay Google, and you pay AWS or whatever. And we have advisors all over the country, and there's no mainframe server in every office on some closed firewall gateway. Yeah, like just
Mhm.
hardwired. It's like, no, our guys can work anywhere. They can work from home. They can work from their offices. A lot of them got rid of their offices because so many of their clients were willing to just go online.
Yep.
Kids are grown. They're like, it's not a problem. A lot of the guys with the younger kids like myself, they're like, I need a little shoebox office somewhere, like you said, just to help create that healthy line of separation with the family. But I think it was a good thing for the industry. And I think more importantly, I don't know if legal in tax is going through this. I feel like somewhat in CPA world, but financial advisors are aging out really bad.
Yeah.
Financial advisors are like 59 or 60 years old is the average age. And they're all planning to retire in the next 5 years. That's a problem. And I think a part of that was this is the office. It's 35 minutes from your house. This is where you're going to have to go every day. And they're just like, the younger people are just like, I'm not doing that. That sounds terrible. And then the people who build those systems are like, well, you're just entitled. And it's like, no, maybe you just aren't keeping up with how the world's transitioning.
Right.
So anyways, it's a breath of fresh air to hear that your firm's converted to meet clients where they are and meet the employees also who work for you where they are, so that's cool.
Yeah. The benefit that I didn't necessarily anticipate is that my recruiting prospects have just expanded nationally in terms of me looking for talent. I used to be limited to not just I couldn't even say Arizona because people wouldn't want to commute from Phoenix or Scottsdale to Mesa because that's 35, 40 minutes. So, but I would have to look in the East Valley. So the cities you mentioned, Mesa, Gilbert, Chandler, Tempe, um, and you're really limiting the talent pool if you're just looking at in the 35-minute radius surrounding your office. Now when I'm looking for talent, I'm looking not just nationally, but I'm looking internationally. I just hired a bookkeeper out of Mexico. I just made an offer to a tax preparer who's worked for big four accounting firms and multinationals her entire career, 12 years accountant, tax pro, and she's in Argentina. And I've got an offer into her, and she's probably going to be joining us in the next few weeks here. And I don't have to limit myself to, again, this local limiting mindset of which ASU grad down the street is ripe, and I have to go steal them from another firm. I can look for my ideal hire is like somebody who's been running their own firm but doesn't want the administrative burden and the risk and the sales requirements to run a firm. But they want to work with a team that has access to training and resources. I'll hire that person who's maybe run their own firm for 3 or 4 years. They come in, they're the perfect advisors for my clients because they know what it's like to run a business. They understand the risk reward, aspect of making decisions. To me, they get it. They get how to the economics of the firm, and so they're able to help me set fees at the appropriate rates. They're conscientious of costs, things like that.
That's cool. Yeah, the talent pool gets really, really big really quick when you suddenly virtual assistants. Some of our best teams for who solve like our commissions for our risk management company are predominantly in Paraguay.
Yeah.
And their English is second language, but it's like basically first language. Their accents are not very strong. They're easy to deal with. It's great. They're in a similar time zones even, so it's just, it's really effective, and it's great.
That's why I chose nearshoring over offshoring. So I'm exclusively looking for talent in Spanish speaking countries in
Yep.
North and South America, because for the reasons you mentioned. And I've worked with groups out of India. We actually this year employed a group of tax and a bookkeeping group out of India, and they did a fantastic job. But there's so many benefits to working with somebody who's somewhat local in terms of culture and language and time zone. There's just so many similarities that
I've
make
worked with
sense.
some VAs that were like in India, and it was really fun for like software type stuff.
Sure.
So because you could say, hey, here's a problem. You do a quick meeting where your days are overlapping a little bit, like your morning, their evening or whatever. And then you would go to bed. It's your evening. Let's say you go to bed and you wake up in the morning and a problem is fixed. You're like, oh, cool. Cause they were working on it all day, their day, while
Yeah.
you were sleeping. And that was neat. But when it's actual team and you're working through problems, the time zones actually, they become a hindrance. So that's why what do you call it? Nearshore? I thought that was,
That's a term I picked up.
that's cool.
I think it's kind of neat.
Yeah. So where do you see CPA? I mean, we talked about if other states take on this Arizona's philosophy, which I love. It's always been really frustrating as an advisor when I'm dealing with, like you said, you're triangulating the financial advisor and the CPA and the legal, and you're trying to get them together, and they don't want to bring in the attorney because the attorney's whacking them on an hourly rate.
Yep.
The CPA bills however they bill. So I saw on your website, we discussed this briefly before, you work on a subscription model.
Mhm.
So where do you why a subscription model? Is that where the industry's going? Let's just unpack that a little bit, because I love subscriptions. I run some subscription model, and a lot of our advisors do. I think planning should be on a subscription model in many cases,
Absolutely.
which is really what a fiduciary, like a managed accounts are subscription models. You're
Hmm.
paying a fee, ongoing fee, to be the client, right? And get the advice. And that's a subscription. But then also you can be in subscription for planning in our space. But for tax and legal, what does it look like? Why? It feels different to me. I haven't seen anybody else doing that.
Yeah, we're not the only firm doing it. It is definitely a trend among the kind of the future firms in my industries. I would say accounting, it's a lot more common than legal, but
Okay.
there are other firms that have these legal subscriptions. Really, if you think about like on the legal side, it's you know you're you've got either every business either has legal counsel internally or they have external legal counsel outsourced, right? And so that's kind of the role that we're playing on the legal side is we're outside general counsel. um, I would actually limit that to outside business counsel. We wouldn't do general counsel would also assist in litigation. We don't do that, and so we're more kind of business counsel. And so if you think about the subscription model, think about Netflix, right? They offer unlimited watching. And so you've got to make sure that when you're setting up a subscription that you are limiting the scope of services because you have the potential to give away a lot of work and time that you didn't intend to if you're not very careful about defining exactly what is included and what's not included. And so I've been burned on this. I've learned my lesson. We've kind of come to what I think, on the tax. So we offer subscriptions for tax, bookkeeping, legal, and nonprofit. And now our fifth one we just added this year is fractional CFO services.
Oh, that's
And
cool.
so
So that
the
higher
idea is,
level
Mhm.
structuring of the financials can be done in the outsourced CFO. And
Yeah.
then
So,
it once that's done, it kind of moves down to the bookkeeping arm.
well, it's like you said before, your buddy said that he's a historian. I would say a traditional bookkeeper and a traditional accountant is a historian. That's accurate because they're past looking. There's kind of three levels the way I see it. You've got the bookkeeping, which is past looking. The one that's focused on current is the controller. So controller is doing things not just categorizing historical transactions, but running payroll, managing AP and AR, banking transactions, things like that. And then you've got the forward-looking piece of the accounting team, which is the CFO. CFO is strategic, planning, looking for opportunities, providing that strategic guidance to the client. And again, that's something that in a large company they're going to have a full accounting team with bookkeepers, controllers, and a CFO. But the target clients we're looking for are too small to have a full-time CFO, too small to have a full-time legal team, and so they still need that strategic advice and guidance, and so they hire us as a fractional service provider.
Is that like a certain revenue, would you say, or is it based on industry? You know,
Yeah, depending on the industry, the revenue level will change. I would say in general, we're looking for clients that are netting, 500,000 to 20 million a year. Um,
okay.
and most of ours are between I'd say 1 and 10 million in top line revenue. One is on the smaller side, but if we're working with a client that is in that boat, they've got to have a mindset. And so this is one of the qualitative factors that we look at when we're trying to figure out who our deal client is. It's not just their current size, but it's what their goals are and what their vision is. And so if they're working to grow and scale and become bigger, if their goal is to be a $10 million client in the next 5, 10 years, even though they're smaller, maybe they're a startup that's brand new. If we deem them, we look at their business plan and we see that they're funded or they've got, a really solid business plan. We'll work with them anyway, even though we may not be able to charge a lot of money right now. It's kind of a long-term investment for us.
Okay. Man, I wonder, that's got to help people scale, right? I mean, people come to you at 2 million and all of a sudden they get this outsourced CFO services. They get bookkeeping handled. You guys work on LLC operating agreements. tax, the tax and legal is coming together as a cohesive conversation now rather than fractured,
Yeah.
right? And you guys are doing your job, and then I'm sure you work with a lot of financial advisors. The advisors doing their job, you guys are doing yours. It's so easy for then, I'm assuming, your team to communicate with the financial advisor, and then of that business, let's say a business owner, that business owner has to be in a better place to scale then. Am I right? Have you seen that with some of your clients that like they start to see increase in revenue because these things are more harmoniously working together?
Yeah, absolutely. I've been doing this long enough where I've seen businesses go full circle through all the the cycles, excuse me, the stages of the business cycle, from startup to growth, maturity, and then sale or exit of some way. And we've had quite a few of our clients that I formed that have now, done well, made money, attracted an investor or a purchaser, and then sold. And then we've got a good relationship with the former business owner who then inevitably starts another business. So we kind of started over again. But yeah, that's the intention. That's the whole vision, is that
Yeah.
they surround themselves with a team of professionals who can advise them on growing and scaling.
Do you
And
guys help on because you're growing scale, and do you help them on the way out, right? When they're looking to sell, do
Yep.
you help through that conversation, the valuation, the what should expect in their, in their sale, so on and so forth?
Yeah, we'll do. We hit it from a multi-pronged perspective. So our CFO team will provide evaluation and projections and help with due diligence. Our tax team can assess the strategies for deferring taxes or avoiding taxes on the sale, and then our legal team will actually represent them on the deal and on the purchase or the sale, represent them, draft the documents, negotiate the terms, things like that.
Yeah, that's that's fun. I mean, to me, it's like the relationships, like, and learning this about like a firm like yours, I can just see for a lot of my clients in my head, like how that kind of relationship would dramatically help their business. So how important is it to partner exclusively? A question I had, for a financial advisor to have multiple relationships, or versus multiple relationships. So working with one team like yours and just really solidifying, working with them most of the time rather than just kind of like, well, I got four CPAs in my pocket. And do you think it's better to really get honed in deep with one team and really get to know and trust each other? Some thoughts on that.
Yeah, I can see both sides, and I've certainly operated from both sides of this coin. Um, I like the idea of having not an exclusive relationship, but a very few and deep relationships with other advisors. The more that you work together, the more you can anticipate the questions that calling your referral partner is going to ask, and the more you can then proactively talk to your clients about those things, and then provide these warm leads. Which again, like I said, is good for everybody. It gets the client thinking about things that they didn't know they should be aware of. It provides a warm lead for your referral, which makes you look good. And then it just meets the client's needs, make sure that everything they need is being taken care of. On the flip side, from a pure numbers perspective, you have relationships with 30 CPAs, you're going to get referrals. I just don't think you're going to get the quality of referrals that you would. And so to me, it's kind of like kids. Um, I have 5 kids,
Okay.
and it's challenging. The more I saw, the more, as I had more kids, and I was young, I started at 21. um, the more kids we had, the harder it was to spend one-on-one time with them. And
Hmm.
so I think the same thing with these professional relationships. A few is good. I think there can be a point where you're trying too hard. And I kind of went that way, and then I intentionally carved it down to where I only have 2 or 3 financial advisors that I refer to now. And those are the ones I have specific reasons for referring to each one of those based on the client's best needs.
Yeah, I want to jump back to the subscription model. What are a couple of the key value adds you think in using subscription model for the end user, the end client?
Yeah, the number one is, the number one is ongoing advice. So on call advice, because you can sit down and meet with a client once a year, and I don't care what your profession is. that's often what we say is we'll meet with you annually and we'll do a review of your X, Y, or Z, right? Um, it's not enough because
Mm.
it's probably, no matter what time of year it is, um, there's going to be stuff that happens in between those meetings. And so that's the kind of stuff that the clients need access to you as these things are happening in their business. It's not enough to map out a plan for them and then say, I'll see you next year. They need someone who's going to help them implement it and make decisions in real time. And so the on-call advice is the number one. I think the second part is the proactive guidance. The more you meet with the client, the better you get to know their business and the better advice you can give to them. And so we're changing our business model slowly to where we have fewer clients but deeper relationships with them. And that comes with a cost. Our clients have to pay premium fees to meet with us and be on our list, but we're also really ingrained. We know what systems they use. We know their other professional advisors. We know what their team looks like. We know how their product works or their services work. We can help them beyond just tax advice. We can help them set their pricing and with their internal leadership meetings and problems with their employees. Things like that are just the things that cause you headaches in a business.
Yeah. So how can then the financial advisor better work with the accountants and the lawyers? As far as, those informal relationship referral, how can we deepen the relationship? If I'm an advisor listening right now, we find that, how can we better work with those people?
Yeah, I think there's a sliding scale here.
Okay.
You've got everything from this informal referral relationship to this formal family office, which is something that we're looking at trying to put together, as you know. But I think the things that have been most effective for me are the way you present yourselves and what no matter what your relationship looks like legally, whether there's no legal relationship association or if you're formally in an LLC as business partners together, if that would ever be allowed, which again I think regulations are changing where it will be allowed. I think the way that you present yourselves to your clients is the key. And so doing things like when a client comes into one of the advisors, you're bringing in your business partner or your referral partners into that intake meeting, and that's not traditional, and that seems like it may not be in your best interest. But I can tell you the times that I've had a financial advisor in an intake meeting with my client, not only did the financial advisor get the work, but my client felt like I was looking at things holistically and proactively. And so and frankly, like as as uh as an accountant, I don't think about the things financial advisors think about. And so there's been times where like I put my CPA hat on and I'm like, tax savings, tax savings, tax savings. That's the only thing that's important. So I remember once I was doing a deal and I was like, hey, if we structure it this way, we're going to be able to put the most money into a deferred tax vehicle, and you're going to pay the least amount of taxes on the sale. And then the financial advisor, who actually had brought me into that project, was like, hey, appreciate your perspective. Certainly agree that's the most current tax savings. However, this client is so young, let's look at a pre-tax, a post-tax vehicle like a Roth. What if we hyper-funded the Roth? What does that look like in 10, 15, 30 years,
Hmm.
as opposed to, you know, should we pay the tax now and then let that grow tax free? And I'm like, well, they're going to pay more taxes. And they're like, that's okay because the end result is they have more money in their pocket. And that's what really the client needs. And so I like this combined approach where, everybody's staying in their own lanes, but together we come out with the best outcome for the client.
Yeah, I mean, then it's just really important in those relationships, right, to just disclose everything. I mean, it's just kind of like who's who and where the clear lines of
Sure.
separation are from who does what, right? And I think as long as the client really knows that and it's really open and you're not trying to make it sound like one person's doing it all, as long as those lines of communication are open and disclosed, it really shouldn't be a problem, I don't think. And I really hope that's where legislation moves, because if we really are supposed to be fiduciaries and do the best thing that's right for the client, that means being involved in those conversations. I mean,
Absolutely.
and not being just left out and then trying to do our best with like one eye closed because we don't know what's
Yeah.
going on the other side with those other relationships. So, um, if an advisor is networking, right? We talked about not just being local, right? Finding people all over the country that do this kind of work.
Yep.
Um, how can an advisor, is it LinkedIn? Like, where do they go? How do we do this as financial advisors? How do we better find people that not everybody's necessarily going to philosophically work with you, or you're not going to necessarily want to work with everybody. I mean, it's how the world works, right? And that's why there's lots of us that do this industry, these industries. Um, what's some things that they can do you think, to deepen relationships with people that do your line of work?
Yeah, I think the first thing you have to do is you really have to know who you are and who you want to work with. And so the more precisely you can define exactly what you do and who your ideal client is, the better the better position you'll be to find other advisors who have the same ideal client. And so that's really what we're looking for. So the practical advice that I got years ago from a business coach was, hey, why don't you start posting on LinkedIn every day, right? And not,
Mm,
maybe I take the weekends off, maybe I take a vacation. I'm not going to kill myself if I miss a few days. It's not a big deal. But generally, I try to post something useful and something informative every day.
mm.
And I've noticed I'm at like 10,000 followers on LinkedIn. Like
It's
I don't,
huge,
I
by
don't,
the way. That's good.
yeah.
Yeah, it's a big deal.
Um,
Yeah.
and I think what's huge about it, it's not the number of followers, but it's the quality of relationships
Mhm.
and the number and quality of relationships that I've found from LinkedIn, um, from other accountants as well as other potential clients, other advisors. I get referrals probably 2 or 3 a week just from my LinkedIn, and because the tone of my LinkedIn is really, it's kind of a day in the life of a professional service provider, right? A business owner who provides professional services. So the content that I write speaks to financial advisors, lawyers, accountants, real estate professionals, healthcare professionals. That's kind of the group that's my target client list, and so that's who I write to. And it's things like maybe tech. Maybe I write about employee situations. Maybe I write about contracts. Maybe I write about tax savings. But a lot of times, I don't just give, I also ask. And people love providing advice. So I'm like, hey, what are you guys doing for X, Y, and Z? What are you doing for this solution? And then people will provide input, and that gives them an opportunity to give you insight into how they run their business. Which there's a psychological phenomenon that the more somebody talks about themselves, the more they trust you, and it's
Isn't that
crazy, but
funny?
it works. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
absolutely true.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, LinkedIn, I would start there. At least that's worked for me. But you've just got to figure out where your ideal client hangs out. Maybe that's Facebook groups. Maybe that's Twitter X. I don't know where it is, but basically, once you figure out where your client profiles are and where your not just your client profiles, but your referral partners, where do they interact online? um, Follow them, interact with them, answer their questions, be helpful, and then be very patient because these relationships will take time. But you'll notice over time, if you're posting useful content and if you're interacting with people that are that you want to speak to and follow, eventually they're going to see you as a resource or as a kind of a
Figure.
expert in
Yeah.
that area, and they're going to send referrals to you. They're going to ask you advice for their personal situation, and that's how once you get that DM, get that first LinkedIn DM, where they say, hey, I've been following you for a while, really like your content, I have a question for you, or I have a referral for you. Then you know that these are people that are interacting, and you'll be surprised how many people follow you for years, and they read your stuff every day and you had no idea, and then eventually you see them at a conference and you get called out and somebody's like, hey, you're Mike Payne. I'm like, yeah, I am. I don't know who you are though.
Yeah, right. They know you really well too, which is always kind of strange. They're like, they know
Awkward.
everything about you, and you're like, okay, cool. So the financial advisor, they're wanting to work with more of these business owners. They're a lot of the stuff you're just discussing. They're getting better in that area. Do they also, they should really take time to get skilled probably on the types of accounts that directly affect business owners? I'm assuming contribution limits, deadlines, things like that. and know some of that? I mean, what do you think an advisor needs to hone their skills on as well?
Yeah. Yeah. What you specifically mentioned are what I see as this area where advisors in different industries will pass the buck. We see it all the time where um, client, whether it's the accountant or the financial advisor recommends to a client opening a retirement account. Um, when we're dealing with all the details of that retirement account, who is supposed to be the expert on that and who takes ownership of it? From an accountant's perspective, the financial advisor should know what types of plans are available, what the process is to get started, what are the contribution limits for each of the different types of plans, what are the deadlines. But what we see, and again, I'm an accountant, so I'm going to say that's my perspective as well. From a financial advisor perspective, often we see that they'll try to push some of that back to the accountant and say, well, I don't know what the tax implications are. So you should be the one that tells me when the contribution deadline is and um, what the contribution limit is. In reality, both of them need to know that. And so if I were a new advisor or if I was an advisor trying to grow my network and grow my business, I would try to become the absolute expert on the different plans available for business owners specifically, and know all of that stuff off the top of my head. Know how to interact. Know things like if a spouse has a 401k at work, now what options are available to the other spouse who's a business owner, and can we add that spouse? Right? There's going to be restrictions, limitations. The more you can learn about all that stuff, the better you're going to be. And I think that knowledge expands beyond just retirement planning. I think the more you can learn about tax planning, business deals, things that accountants and lawyers and lenders do. You learn about SBA loans. You're never going to be the one that makes final decisions or provides, advice that the clients are relying on. But to the extent that you can call out those issues as relevant, and then tell clients, "Hey, I've seen the situation before. Here's how it was handled by another advisor, by the lawyer, by the CPA. I expect something similar to happen here. Let's bring somebody in and let them give us their opinion. But you just have to know enough to be able to really identify the issue.
Yeah, I mean, you're not the doctor writing the prescription, but you got to be the nurse that can maybe enough to be dangerous, right? And
Sure.
then so you can at least start open the conversation. It's
Yep.
really hard to work in a space if you know nothing about it, right?
Yeah,
So
you're the triage nurse, right?
yeah,
You're
pressure, right?
identifying
Yeah,
that there's something wrong. So let's get you to the right doctor.
yeah, and I think I mean, just like anything else, right? If you're trying to move into that space and you're not familiar with it, you can go learn all you can. And then after that, you're going to have to fail forward. You're going to have to
Yep.
open conversations, work through it. You learn more on that next situation, a little bit more the next time. And if that's really the niche you want to work in as business owners, it's just going to take time because it's complicated, right? There's so many scenarios in situations that they can go through because some companies are C corps and LLCs, and there's asset purchases versus or asset sales versus the whole company, let's say. So
Which is another reason, like you said earlier, to niche as narrow as possible, because the more you work with one specific type of client or a few specific types of clients, the more you learn about their industry, the more you figure out, you see what the trends are. You see that every time I work with somebody in this industry, they're always an LLC set up as an S corp, and there's probably a reason for that. So the more broad your target list is, or types of clients you're willing to work with, the more you have to learn. And so it's just you do yourself a disservice by trying to do everything for everybody.
yeah, yeah. It's just a topic that I mean, it kind of got into a hot button. If advisors are paying much attention, niching down has really become a hot topic, if you will, the last handful of years. I don't think most advisors, as I said, are actually doing that. And it's funny, they'll always push back. Yeah, but it's too narrow. And I'm like, how narrow is some of these markets are so huge. If you captured 2% of or 1% of this market, you would have a book bigger than you can handle.
Hmm.
So calm down. I think a lot of times we think it's like, well, I'm just going to get through everybody. It's like, no, you're not. There's too many HVAC companies in the country for you to even potentially begin to wrap your head around, let alone your state. So it's just whoever you want to get into. I think the more you learn it, like I said, then you can become the expert. You learn the nomenclature, you learn the little language, and then you can really sound, well, you're not sounding smart, you are smart in their space, because you really have lived it and learned all the different situations that they go through.
And
I think
one area that's underserved, sorry to interrupt you, I would just say if I was a financial advisor and I was starting out, I would learn everything I could about nonprofits and specifically private foundations. That happens to be one of my areas of expertise. When I was at Ernst and Young, all I did for 7 years was nonprofit tax work,
oh
and so
wow.
I learned everything there was to know about, uh, you know, different types of nonprofits, public charities, private foundations, political associations, churches, schools. I learned everything about what the IRS requires, what the different states require in terms of compliance. I saw pretty much every big issue that you would see with a nonprofit. I lived it, like you said. And what I've learned is that when you're dealing with private foundations, which again is a subset of the overall nonprofit world, private foundations have significant amounts of capital,
Yep.
and they have to invest it because they have a what's called a required. It's basically a giving requirement. They have to give away 5% of their net assets every year, and so in order to give away 5% of their assets every year, they have to bring in enough investment income that's going to beat that 5% rate. And so, if I was a financial advisor, I would try to learn everything I could about nonprofits and then go target those big private foundations that have 10, 15, $100 million of assets because their business model is really simple. They only usually have a few people that are on their board. They have one employed staff or two, but they've got this massive endowment of assets that has to be invested. And if you can get in with one of those, you'll see that all the foundation managers talk to each other. So if you get in with a private foundation that has any substantial assets, you're going to get in with more and more similar clients, and that could become that would be a niche that I would definitely pursue.
Yeah,
If I was
and
in
a
your
lot of the
industry.
nonprofits need a lot of help running cash and things
Yep.
that only an advisor can do, especially with the interest rates where they are right now. You can really run cash in a smart way for these nonprofits and actually make them returns. And I've talked to churches and foundation, and they've got, like I said, seven figures many times in banks at singular banks.
Yes.
And you're like, okay, FDIC, like you guys aren't even covered here. So then what are they going to do? Spread it out to five different banks? It gets crazy, and they need somebody in their life that can help them execute that properly. Um,
Yeah, and you'll see that the nice part of working with nonprofits is that you've got a board of directors who has also shares a fiduciary duty.
mm,
And so they're willing to hire help because first it's not coming out of their pocket necessarily, right? They're managing essentially public funds.
right.
And so they're not afraid to spend money the way maybe a business owner would when it's coming out of their bottom line. But the other part is because they have that fiduciary duty to make sure that the organization's assets are used ethically, they almost have to. I would argue they always have to surround themselves with advisors, whether that's accountants, lawyers, or financial advisors. They should not be trying to make those decisions on their own. If they do, I would argue, that they potentially have violated that fiduciary duty, unless they happen to be an expert in that industry. A nonprofit that prepares its own tax return is probably doing it wrong. A
mm.
nonprofit that chooses its own investments is probably not doing the best that they could do with that money.
I would just say lastly, I mean, this is really fun conversation, just talking tax and legal, and really uniquely, and not on purpose at all. The first conversation with an attorney on the show happened to also be the first conversation with a CPA, which is really cool. Um, and Arizona is really unique. I love that idea. I hope things, you know, nationally start to move in that direction, especially if the rest of, Western culture, if you will, Western capitalism is moved in that direction. Then hopefully we start to see that more in the States as well.
Yeah.
I think it helps. It helps the relationship, helps us to be able to do a better job for our clients. This has just been really fun to dive into this part, this process. So how can, if people do want to reach out to you and your team specifically, advisors, if you're taking on advisors, anything like that, what's a good way for them to reach out to you and see if maybe you guys are a good fit?
Sure.
What's the best way?
Yeah. So you can find me on LinkedIn. It's Mike Payne, JDCPA. Or you can find me on my website. It's bossadv.com, bossadv.com, like Boss Advisors.
Cool. Awesome. Well, hey, Mike, this has been a lot of fun. Appreciate you coming on the show and just talking through everything. Hopefully next time I'm out in the greater Phoenix area to see some of our advisors, we can link up and, have some fun together. Hopefully it's when it's cooler.
Yes.
And we'll go ride some motorcycles.
Love it, Josh. All right. Hey, thanks for having me. It's been great.
Yep. Thanks, bud. Have a good day. All right. Welcome to the disclosures for the Advisors Collective. The conversations on this podcast are intended to provide financial advisors with ideas, strategies, concepts, and tools that could be incorporated into their advisory practice. Advisors are ultimately responsible for ensuring implementation and compliance of anything discussed in accordance with your regulatory and compliance responsibilities and obligations. These discussions are meant purely for educational purposes. None of the information heard should be taken as financial advice or planning. The conversations and opinions that are expressed in the show are that of each host only and do not necessarily reflect the opinion of the other hosts and their affiliated companies. This podcast is not intended to give tax, legal, or investment advice. Always consult with a qualified professional. For my practice, securities are offered through Cape Securities Incorporated, member FINRA, SIPC. Investment advisory accounts are offered through Terra Wealth Management.